She was 84 years old. Her hands were shaking, and she had just walked up to the most dangerous man in Greenwich, Connecticut, and asked him to pretend to be her son. He didn't laugh. He didn't blink. He set down his chopsticks, looked her dead in the eyes, and said one word that changed everything. But before I tell you what he said, you need to understand what she was running from, because this woman wasn't confused. She wasn't lost. She was being hunted, and the predator was someone she'd loved her entire life. Right now, there's someone in your life, maybe your grandmother, maybe your neighbor, being pressured into signing something they don't understand. And most people scroll right past stories like this. If you're not that person, subscribe to Tales by Wave, because what happened next in that restaurant is something everyone needs to hear. The place was called Kiyomi, a high-end Korean restaurant on Greenwich Avenue, the kind with cloth napkins folded into cranes, and a wine list thicker than a phone book. The lunch crowd was exactly what you'd expect in one of the wealthiest zip codes in America. Hedge fund wives, real estate attorneys, old money dressed in new cashmere. And in the private back section, separated by a frosted glass partition, sat a man who didn't belong to any of those worlds. Shin Tae-jun ate alone. He always ate alone. A single bowl of kimchi jjigae, a pot of barley tea, and a silence around him so heavy the waitstaff moved through it like water around a stone. He was 47, clean-shaven, a face built from angles and patience. His suit was charcoal, tailored so precisely it looked like a second skin. No jewelry, no watch, just a small scar above his left eyebrow that he never explained to anyone. In Greenwich, people whispered about him the way they whispered about weather they couldn't control. He owned the building Kiyomi operated in. He owned the building next to it. He owned properties in Stamford, in Bridgeport, in parts of Manhattan that don't show up in the regular listings. The money was clean on paper, immaculate in presentation, and built on a foundation that nobody in that restaurant wanted to examine too closely. Tae-jun was the head of a syndicate that stretched from Flushing to Seoul. Korean organized crime. Old structure, new money. His people called him boss. The people who owed him called him sir. The people who feared him didn't call him anything at all. And into his silence walked Vivian Monroe. She was small, 5'2", maybe less, with age curving her spine like a question mark. Her coat was camel-colored, clean but old. Her shoes were sturdy flats, the kind made for walking, not for impressing. She carried a handbag the color of burgundy wine, clutched against her chest like it held her entire life inside it, and maybe it did. She moved slowly, every step deliberate. The hostess tried to intercept her, but Vivian walked past her like she was furniture. She stopped at Tae-jun's table. He looked up. Their eyes met, hers deep brown and ancient and absolutely terrified. His, dark and still and giving nothing away. She opened her mouth. Her voice came out thin, almost transparent, like paper held up to light. "Excuse me. I know who you are. Everyone on the street knows who you are." She paused, swallowed. The handbag trembled against her chest. "My nephew is coming here in 30 minutes. He's bringing a lawyer. They want me to sign over my house, my savings, everything. They've been doing this for months, piece by piece, taking everything." Her voice cracked, but she didn't stop. "I don't have anyone. My son died 11 years ago. I have no one to sit beside me, no one to make them think twice." She looked at this man, the stranger, this person the entire town avoided, and asked him the question that would rearrange both their lives. "Can you pretend to be my son today?" The restaurant had gone so quiet you could hear the ice shifting in water glasses 3 tables away. Tae-jun didn't move. His expression was stone. The only sign he'd heard her at all was a single, almost invisible tightening of his jaw. He studied her face the way he studied everything, with the patience of a man who had learned that the first reaction is almost never the right one. He saw the fear, but underneath it, buried deep, he saw something else. Resolve. This woman was terrified, but she was not broken. He had seen broken people. He had made some of them. This was different. "Sit down," he said. His voice was quiet, not warm, not cold, just certain. Vivian's knees buckled slightly. She gripped the edge of the table, and before she could fall, Taejun's hand was there, steadying her arm. His grip was careful, calibrated, the touch of someone who understood exactly how much force he carried. He guided her into the chair across from him. Then he poured her a cup of barley tea with both hands, a gesture of respect so deeply Korean that Vivian wouldn't have understood its significance. But she felt it. She wrapped both hands around the warm cup and breathed. "Tell me everything," he said. "Leave nothing out." And she did. Because when you've been drowning for months and someone finally says, "I see you," you don't hold back. Vivian Monroe had lived in the same house on Millbank Avenue for 51 years. Her husband, Clarence, had bought it in 1974 when Greenwich was still a place where a black postal worker with good credit and a stubborn wife could plant roots. Clarence died in 2003. Their only son, Raymond, died in 2014. A heart attack at 46. No warning, no goodbye. After Raymond, the loneliness came like a tide, slow at first, then constant. And into that loneliness walked her nephew, Garrett. Garrett was Raymond's cousin on Clarence's side, 41 years old, a real estate developer from Westport with teeth too white and handshakes that lasted too long. He drove a Range Rover and wore cologne that announced him before he entered a room. At first, Garrett was kind. He called every Sunday. He brought groceries. He took Vivian to her doctor's appointments. He said all the right things. "You're family, Auntie Viv. I just want to make sure you're taken care of. Let me help with the paperwork. It's confusing." Vivian, starving for connection, let him in. That was 18 months ago. The first document was a healthcare proxy. "Just in case something happens, Auntie." She signed. The second was a financial power of attorney. "The bank needs this to process your account updates." She signed. The third was a revised will. "Your lawyer said this was outdated. I had a friend update it." She hesitated. Something cold moved in her stomach. But Garrett smiled that wide, practiced smile. And she signed. 3 weeks ago, Garrett brought a new document, thick, legal-sized, full of language that swam in front of her eyes. "This transfers the house into a family trust," he explained. "It protects you from taxes." But this time, Vivian read the fine print, not because she understood the legal language, but because one phrase jumped off the page like a scream. Sole beneficiary, Garrett Monroe. Not the family, not a charity, not even shared among relatives. Garrett alone. Everything. And she realized, with a horror so deep it made her physically sick, that every document she had signed for 18 months had been designed to do one thing: erase her. Transfer her 51 years of roots, of memories, of Clarence and Raymond and every Christmas and every quiet evening on the porch into the pocket of a man who saw her house as a line item and her life as an obstacle. She refused to sign. Garrett's mask slipped, just for a second, but she saw it. The coldness behind the smile, the calculation behind the concern. "Auntie Viv, you're confused. This is for your protection. I'll bring the lawyer next time. He'll explain everything." That was the threat. The lawyer, the one who would look at her age, her isolation, her trembling hands, and declare her incompetent. And once that happened, she wouldn't need to sign anything at all. Taejun listened without interrupting. When she finished, the barley tea was cold and her hands had stopped shaking. Telling the truth had given her a temporary strength. He was quiet for a long time. Then he asked a question that surprised her. "The house, What is it worth? The last assessment was $4.2 million, but the land alone is worth more. Millbank Avenue, you know the street. He knew the street. Everyone in Greenwich real estate knew Millbank Avenue. Old trees, old money, old land that developers circled like vultures. And the other documents you signed, the power of attorney, the will. He has copies of everything. His lawyer, a man named Henderson, prepared them all. Taejun's eyes narrowed slightly. Henderson. He knew that name, too. A certain kind of lawyer who served a certain kind of client. The kind who got paid to make vulnerable people disappear from their own lives. He looked at Vivian, this woman who had walked across a restaurant to ask a stranger for help. Not the police, not a lawyer, not a social worker. She had come to him. She knew exactly who he was. And she came anyway. That meant she had already tried the other doors, or she knew they were locked. "What time is your nephew arriving?" he asked. 12:30. He glanced at his watch. 22 minutes. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, pressed one number, spoke in Korean, fast and low, for exactly 9 seconds. Then he set the phone down. "When he arrives," Taejun said, looking at Vivian with an expression that was no longer neutral, "I am your son. My name is David. You will call me David. I've been living overseas. I just came back." Vivian's eyes filled with tears. "You'll do it?" "I'll do more than that." He paused. "I'm going to make sure he never comes near you again." The way he said it wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic. It was the voice of a man who had made promises like this before and kept every single one. Most people think elder abuse only happens in nursing homes. It doesn't. It happens in beautiful houses, on quiet streets, by people who smile and say, "I love you, Auntie." If this story is making you feel something, you're paying attention. Subscribe to Tales by Wave, because staying silent is how they win. At exactly 12:30, the front door of Kiyomi opened, and Garrett Monroe walked in like he owned time itself. He was tall, 6'2", a navy blazer over a crisp white shirt, no tie, loafers that cost more than most people's rent. Behind him trailed a shorter man in a gray suit, carrying a leather briefcase. Henderson, the lawyer. Garrett scanned the restaurant with the confidence of a man who had never been challenged in a room like this. His eyes found Vivian in the back section, and he smiled, that wide, automatic, practiced smile. Then the smile collapsed, because sitting next to his 84-year-old aunt at a table set for 3 was a man he had never seen before, a man whose presence radiated something Garrett's instincts immediately recognized, but his brain refused to accept. Danger. Garrett slowed. Henderson nearly walked into his back. "Auntie Viv," Garrett said, his voice bright, but his eyes locked at Taejun. "Who's your friend?" Vivian smiled, and for the first time in 18 months, the smile was real. "Garrett, this is David, my son." The word landed like a grenade in a quiet room. Garrett's face went through 4 expressions in 2 seconds: confusion, disbelief, calculation, fear. "Your son?" he repeated flatly. "Auntie Viv, Raymond passed away 11 years ago. You don't have a son." "Raymond was my youngest," Taejun said. Her voice was steady now. Taejun's presence had given her something she hadn't felt in months, a wall to lean against. "David is from before Clarence. He grew up in Korea. We reconnected." It was a lie. A beautiful, desperate, perfectly constructed lie, and Vivian delivered it with the calm of a woman who had nothing left to lose. Taejun stood. He buttoned his jacket with one hand, a gesture so smooth that looked rehearsed. He extended his hand toward Garrett, not for a handshake, for a test. "Garrett, Mom's told me so much about you." The word mom, coming from this man's mouth, in that voice, in this context, was the most disorienting thing Garrett had ever experienced. He didn't take the hand. He couldn't. His body had overridden his social training and was telling him one thing: this man is not someone you touch casually. "I don't understand," Garrett said. He looked at Henderson. Henderson's face was blank, the professional mask of a man who had walked into a situation his retainer didn't cover. "Nothing to understand," Taejun said. He sat back down and pulled out the chair next to Vivian. "Sit. You came to discuss business. Let's discuss business." Garrett sat. He had no choice. Refusing would mean admitting this situation was outside his control, and Garrett Monroe never admitted that. Henderson sat beside him, placing the briefcase on the table with the careful precision of a man setting down a bomb. "So," Taejun said, folding his hands on the table, "Mom tells me you've been helping her with some paperwork." The word helping carried a weight that made Garrett's jaw tighten. "I've been managing her affairs," Garrett said carefully. "Since Raymond passed, there's been no one to handle her finances, her medical decisions, her property. I stepped in." "Stepped in," Taejun repeated. He let the silence stretch. 3 seconds. 5. 7. Garrett filled it, because silence terrified him. "Look, I don't know who you are, but Auntie Viv is my family. I've been taking care of her." "Then you won't mind showing me what you've brought today." Garrett glanced at Henderson. Henderson gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod, the kind of nod that said, "Play along, figure it out later." Henderson opened the briefcase and pulled out a manila folder. He slid it across the table toward Vivian. But Taejun intercepted it. His hand came down on the folder with a soft, definitive thud. "I'll review this first, for my mother." "These are private legal documents," Henderson said, speaking for the first time. His voice was nasal and precise. "Between Miss Monroe and her designated representative." Taejun looked at Henderson. Just looked. No threat, no words, just a gaze that communicated something Henderson's expensive education had never prepared him for. Henderson stopped talking. Taejun opened the folder. He read slowly, carefully, page by page. The restaurant moved around them, waitstaff flowing past like water around rocks. But at that table, time had stopped. He read for 4 minutes. Nobody spoke. Then he closed the folder. "This document transfers full ownership of 1847 Millbank Avenue to a trust controlled solely by Garrett Monroe," he said clinically. "It also grants irrevocable financial power of attorney, meaning my mother would lose the ability to make any decisions about her own money." He looked at Garrett. "And there's a clause on page 7, paragraph 4, a pre-authorization for residential care placement, meaning once she signs this, you can put her in a facility anytime you want without her consent." The restaurant might as well have been empty. The only thing that existed was this table and the truth that had just been laid on it. Vivian's hand flew to her mouth. She hadn't known about the care placement clause. Garrett had never mentioned it. "That's a standard protective measure," Henderson started. "It's a cage, built out of paper, and presented as kindness." Garrett leaned forward. His face had gone from careful to desperate. "This is none of your business. I don't know who you think you are, but you have no legal standing here." Taejun reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. He placed it on the table and slid it toward Henderson. Henderson picked it up, read it, and the color drained from his face so fast it was like watching paint thinner hit canvas. "Mr. Henderson," Taejun said softly, "I think you know the name on that card, and I think you know that my legal standing is the least of your concerns. There are people right now, today, signing documents they don't understand because someone they trust told them it was safe. If you have a grandmother, a parent, anyone elderly in your life, pay attention. This story isn't fiction, it's a warning. Subscribe to Tales by Wave because some stories can save a life." Anderson put the business card down. His hands were trembling. He leaned toward Garrett and whispered something. Garrett's face went from desperate to furious. "We're leaving," Garrett said. He reached for the folder. Tajan's hand was already on it. "The documents stay," Tajan said. "You can't do that. Those are legal property." "So is my mother's house. So is her dignity. So is her right to live the rest of her life without someone stripping it away one signature at a time." Garrett stood. His chair scraped against the floor like a scream. "I'll call the police," he said. "This is theft. This is intimidation." Tajan looked up at him with an expression that would haunt Garrett for years. It wasn't anger. It wasn't threatening. It was pity. "Call them," Tajan said. "When they arrive, I'll show them these documents, and I'll tell them about the healthcare proxy you had her sign last March, the one that lists a physician who has already agreed to declare her mentally incompetent. A physician, Mr. Henderson, who I understand has done this before. Twice. Both times for your clients." Henderson stood so fast his chair almost fell over. "I have no idea what you're talking about," he said, but his voice had climbed 2 octaves. "Dr. Patel in Stanford," Tajan said. "He declared Miriam Foster incompetent in 2021. Her grandson sold her house 6 weeks later. He declared Thomas Chen incompetent in 2023. His daughter liquidated his estate within the year. Both cases handled by your firm." Silence. Vivian was staring at Tajan, this man she'd asked to play a simple role, pretend to be her son for 30 minutes, had walked into this meeting with more information than she'd gathered in 18 months. Because Tajan hadn't just agreed to help her. In those 22 minutes before Garrett arrived, he had made one phone call. And that phone call had activated a network that moved faster than any law firm, faster than any court, faster than anything Garrett Monroe had ever encountered. The syndicate didn't just run businesses and territory. It tracked money. It tracked lawyers. It tracked patterns. And the pattern Henderson and Garrett were running, targeting isolated elderly people, manufacturing incompetency diagnoses, liquidating estates, wasn't invisible to people who made their living understanding exactly how wealth moved from one hand to another. Garrett hadn't just been stealing from Vivian, he'd been running a scheme, and Tajan's people had been watching lawyers like Henderson for months. Vivian's request hadn't just been a coincidence. It had been the key that opened a lock Tajan's organization had been trying to pick. "Here's what's going to happen," Tajan said. He hadn't raised his voice once. He didn't need to. "You're going to return every document my mother has signed in the last 18 months. Every proxy, every power of attorney, every revision to her will. You have 72 hours. Garrett's mouth opened. Nothing came out. "You're going to cancel Monday's appointment with Dr. Patel, and you're going to understand very clearly that if my mother receives a single phone call, a single letter, a single visit from anyone connected to you or your firm, I will take personal interest." He let those last 3 words sit in the air. Personal interest. In Tajan's world, those words meant something that no courtroom could translate. Henderson understood. His face said everything his mouth couldn't. "And, Mr. Henderson," I added, almost as an afterthought, "the Connecticut Attorney General's office has been investigating elder fraud in Fairfield County. I imagine they'd be very interested in the Foster and Chen cases. Whether that investigation reaches your desk depends entirely on what happens in the next 72 hours. Henderson grabbed Garrett's arm. "We need to leave now." Garrett yanked his arm free. He looked at Vivian, and for the first time, the mask was completely gone. No charm, no concern, no pretense. Just rage. "You ungrateful old woman," he hissed, "after everything I did for you." Vivian flinched. 11 months of fear compressed in that flinch. But before the flinch could become a collapse, she felt a hand on her shoulder. Taejun's hand. Steady, certain, a wall. Everything you did for her, Taejin repeated slowly. Let me tell you what someone who actually cares does. They don't bring lawyers to lunch. They don't hide clauses in paragraph 7. They don't schedule doctors to steal someone's mind on paper. He stood. He was not as tall as Garrett, but in that moment, he was the tallest person in the room. My mother buried her husband. She buried her son. She lived alone in a house full of memories and kept going. She didn't need your help. She needed your honesty. And you gave her a contract. Garrett's face crumbled, not with shame, with the realization that he had lost, completely, irreversibly. He turned and walked out. Henderson followed, almost running. The door closed behind them and the restaurant exhaled. Most people who exploit the elderly never get caught. They wear nice suits, they say, "I love you," they smile while they steal. Garrett almost won. If Vivian hadn't walked across that restaurant, she would have lost everything by Monday. If you think these stories matter, if you think people need to hear them, subscribe to Tales by Wave, because silence protects the wrong people. Vivian sat at that table for a long time after they left. The shredded remains of fear scattered around her like confetti from a war she'd finally won. Her hands weren't shaking anymore. The tea Taejin poured her was warm. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me yet," Taejin said. "This isn't over." And it wasn't. Within 72 hours, every document Vivian had signed appeared in a sealed envelope at her front door. Every proxy, every power of attorney, every will revision. Henderson's firm returned them without a single word. Within a week, Taejin arranged for Vivian to meet with an independent elder law attorney, a woman named Patricia Kwan from his legitimate business network. Patricia reviewed everything, filed protective orders, and restructured Vivian's estate so that no single person could ever control it again. Within a month, the Connecticut Attorney General's office opened a formal investigation into Henderson's practice. The Foster and Chen families were contacted. Both cases were reopened. Garrett Monroe's real estate development firm quietly dissolved. His Westport house went on the market. He moved to Florida without telling anyone. Nobody followed up on him. Nobody needed to. But the part of the story that nobody expected, the part that even Vivian couldn't have predicted, was what happened between her and Taejun after the fight was over. He came back. Not because he had to, not because she called. He just came back. The following Tuesday at noon, he walked into Kiyomi and sat at the same table. Vivian was already there. She had ordered barley tea for 2. They didn't talk about Garrett. They didn't talk about documents or lawyers or theft. She asked him about Korea. He asked her about Clarence. She told her about the garden she used to keep, how she grew tomatoes the size of fists and gave them away to neighbors every August. He told her about his mother in Busan, who had died when he was 19, and who used to make kimchi so spicy it would make grown men cry. 2 people from completely different worlds, sitting across from each other, discovering that loss sounds the same in every language. He came every Tuesday after that. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they sat in silence. She started bringing him food, homemade cornbread wrapped in foil, peach cobbler in a glass dish she demanded he return. He started sending his driver to take her to appointments. He had her porch light fixed, her furnace serviced, her property taxes reviewed by an accountant who owed him a favor. She never asked what he did for a living. He never pretended to be something he wasn't. She called him David. He called her Mom. And somewhere between the lie they told Garrett and the truth they dealt after, the pretending stopped. It wasn't pretending anymore. One evening in October, 3 months after that day in the restaurant, a black sedan pulled up. Taejun stepped out carrying a small paper bag. "What's that?" she asked. "Songpyeon. My mother used to make them for Chuseok. I had them flown in." He sat beside her and opened the bag. Small, crescent-shaped rice cakes filled with sesame and honey. Vivian tasted one. Her eyes closed. "Clarence would have loved these," she said. "My mother would have loved your cornbread," he answered. They sat on the porch as the sun went down over Millbank Avenue. Two people who had both buried the people they loved most, and found, in the most unlikely place, a reason to set another plate at the table. 2 years passed. Vivian turned 86. Taejun threw her a birthday party at Kiyomi, the first birthday party she'd had since Raymond died. The restaurant was closed for the evening. The staff cooked a 7-course meal. Vivian wore a dress she'd been saving for something worth celebrating. She blew out the candles on a cake shaped like a garden tomato, and Taejun's men, these hardened, terrifying, silent men who had once made an entire restaurant hold its breath, sang "Happy Birthday" in a mix of English and Korean that was so off-key it made Vivian laugh until she cried. She stood up, steadied herself on the table, and raised her glass. "I walked into this restaurant 2 years ago because I was afraid," she said. "I asked a stranger to pretend to be my son because I had no one left." She looked at Taejun. "I didn't get a pretend son. I got a real one, the kind who shows up, the kind who stays." Taejun didn't speak. His jaw tightened, his eyes stayed on his plate, but Vivian saw what everyone else in that room saw. For the first time, the most dangerous man in Greenwich was trying very hard not to cry. Later that night, after the guests had left, Vivian sat with Taejun in the empty restaurant. She reached into her burgundy handbag, the same one she'd clutched to her chest like a shield that first day, and pulled out an envelope. "I had Patricia update my will," she said. "The house, the savings, everything. When I'm gone, it goes to a trust. Half funds scholarships for kids aging out of foster care. The other half goes to the Korean Community Center in Flushing." She set the envelope on the table. "I named you as executor, not because you're powerful, because you showed up when no one else would." Taejun looked at the envelope, then at her. "I was eating lunch," he said quietly. "You interrupted my lunch." Vivian laughed, that deep, full, unbroken laugh of a woman who had survived everything life had thrown at her. "And you'll never eat in peace again," she said. He picked up the envelope. He didn't open it. He placed it inside his jacket, close to his chest. "No," I agreed. "I won't." Outside, Greenwich was quiet. The lights on Millbank Avenue glowed warm through old windows, and somewhere in that stillness, two people who had started as strangers sat together in a truth that neither of them had planned for. Family isn't blood. It isn't contracts. It isn't last names or legal documents or who shows up at the reading of the will. Family is who sits beside you when the whole world tells you you're alone. And sometimes the person who saves your life is the one everyone else was afraid to sit next to. This story isn't just a story. Right now, someone you know is being isolated, pressured, manipulated by someone they trust. One phone call could change everything for them. One moment of paying attention. If Tales by Wave made you feel something today, subscribe, share this, and the next time you see an elderly person sitting alone, remember Vivian. Remember that she only needed one person to say, "Sit down." Don't be the one who looked away. 3 months after her 86th birthday, Vivian called Taejun at 2 in the morning. She never called that late. He answered on the first ring. "David?" Her voice was calm. "Someone is outside my house." He was in his car before she finished the sentence, and what he found when he arrived wasn't Garrett. It was something far worse, something that would test whether the family they'd built could survive the one enemy even a man like Taejun couldn't fight. But that is a story for next time.